Welcome to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with your host, Austin Davidson and John Keir, talking Steelers all the time. Now, here's Austin and John.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Stronger Than Steel podcast. I'm John Keir, one of your co-hosts, and joining me as always is our other co-host, Austin Davidson.
Heyo.
It is a somber edition of today's episode. The Pittsburgh Steelers are now 8-6-1 after falling to the New Orleans Saints 31-28 in what can only be described as a crushing defeat. There are many ways to describe this loss, but there aren't any that are good. This is really just a tough loss, and we're actually recording just shortly after the game. Normally we wait a day or two to do this. We like to look at the tape, kind of get a feel, let things settle in, but we figured right now would just be a good time to let things out and just kind of maybe air grievances and just kind of go through the game, at least the important parts of the game right now. So I guess just what are your initial thoughts from this game?
My initial thoughts were that the Steelers are a good team that really screwed themselves in down the run, because the Steelers shouldn't have been expected to win this game. Both me and John both picked the Steelers to lose this game when we picked our final score prediction, and it's really just a shame. This loss had no silver lining, and it was just crushing because coming in, I had no hope. We talked about the refs. We knew how these refs were. We knew that the Steelers were going to get in trouble with the refs a few times this game. And it's exactly how it went. There was like 5 ticky-tacky calls that were absolutely either terrible or like, why would that be called? It was just terrible. And it's just the Steelers couldn't overcome it. It looked like for a little bit that they were going to overcome it. But the Saints and the rest were too much, and they shouldn't have put themselves in this position, because I would have never picked them to even come close. If this matchup came like 5 weeks ago, I probably would have just picked the Saints, because the Saints looked like a Super Bowl team. Like I was glad that the Steelers. I mean, it's hard to say glad, but like I was happy with how the Steelers performed in this game for the most part. Just there's some crushing individual performances, individual mistakes that happened, but there's like a lot of guys that played at their best. Like Ben Roethlisberger probably played his best game of the season. It's really hard to argue another game was better. No interceptions, no turnovers, 3 touchdowns, over 300 yards throwing. Like, what more do you want? Antonio Brown probably had his best game of the season, 180 yards, 2 touchdowns. It's just, you really can't get much more than that. And the defense didn't get beat every single drive that the Saints offense had. They had shutdown drives, like drives where they got 2 sacks and stuff. And it was just really crushing. Like, there was hope for a while, for a little bit, and then it just got crushed, because I came in with no hope, and then I had it put into me only to be ripped away. It was actually really terrible. So what are your initial thoughts from this game?
Well, it's just a microcosm of this whole season. I mean, the Steelers we know that we didn't really learn much about this team, about who the Pittsburgh Steelers are. We've known all season that when they are playing at their best, they're good enough to beat anybody. But the mark of a good team is being able to play your best and make the big plays when it matters most. And for the last 4 years, we've seen it enough for the Steelers to make the playoffs. And this could be a year where the Steelers don't get into the playoffs. And really, they have no one but themselves to blame. This game really, I felt like, was a microcosm of the entire season. You go back and look at the tie against the Browns, the losses to basically every team except the loss to the Ravens. You can look at individual mistakes, certain, just a few plays here and there that changed the course of the game in key moments. And it's just, you want better from them. And, it's one of those weird instances where I feel like last year the Steelers got a ton of breaks that went their way. They made the big plays in the close games, and they came out with a bunch of wins in one-score games. This year, it almost feels like it's been the opposite, but you still have to find a way to make some plays. I mean, let's just look. They've lost 4 or 5 now. You need not look further than the last 4 losses. You've got a crushing loss at Denver where you throw an interception at the 1-yard line with the game on the line, and you have 3 turnovers prior to that. You blow a 16-point lead at home to the Los Angeles Chargers, a game that you could have won in the second half merely by scoring just one more touchdown. You've got the inexplicable loss to the Raiders, where playing even some semblance of competent football for a little bit would have won you that game. And then you have this game where it's really just three plays that come to mind, in particular being the fumbles by Stephen Ridley, Juju Smith-Schuster, and the fake punt call. I mean, that's really all there is to say. You can always say, like, what if? But at the end of the day, the Steelers, they aren't as good of a football team as we thought. We know they can be a good football team, a great football team, but because they aren't making these plays, they aren't great. You know, you are what your record says you are, and that's the most frustrating thing, I think, is that we know the Steelers are capable of so much more. And that's the really frustrating aspect, is that we've seen so much better. We see the talent, but it's the inconsistencies that we've seen from these guys that are just, it's mind-boggling. And then you shoot yourself in the foot only so many times, and it's going to come back to bite you, as it did in this game. It's hard. And then I guess just at the end of the day, you'll look back at the season and say, you know, they had so many X amount of chances, and it really never, like you said, it really should never have come down to this game, but it did. And going into New Orleans against the best team in football, that's not where you want to be. And they put up a good fight, but that's not really worth much right now. So I guess let's just the way this game broke out, the Steelers' offense started kind of slow, as you might have expected given where they were playing. The Saints got kind of a lucky break on a questionable pass interference call on Joe Hayden. And I'll be honest with you, I thought this was a really poor call. I was expecting, like we were talking about, like you said, that there were going to be some unfavorable calls, but I think this one was a little overboard.
Yeah, this one was not very good at all. It was basically, it's still something I don't really blame, because the ref just wasn't in the right position, I guess, to him. Because basically what the stat that we looked at says to me is they don't want to get, like, booed by the fans or something. Because if you're not calling on the home team, it means you're scared. If in any doubt, you're going to fight for the home team so you don't get, like, booed. I don't know. Maybe that's it, but the ref didn't have a good angle, and instead, because he thought it might have been pass interference, he threw that flag, and it was just absolutely mind-boggling. It brought the Saints down to the 1, and there was no way the Steelers were stopping the Saints at the 1 when they have Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara, and then you also have Michael Thomas and all these guys. It was really just awful. It really didn't feel good, but I mean, that's not even the penalty that I hate the most from this game.
What is the penalty you hated the most?
Penalty I hate the most got to be that pass interference later on in the game, where the ball was tipped. The ball was tipped.
Are you sure it was tipped though? Because I've been looking at that, and I'm not as sure now that it was tipped as I was at the time.
I don't know. Like, I watched it because I just watched it 5 minutes ago. Because Stephon Tuitt himself said, "Dang, that's crazy," or "Damn, that's crazy." And Richard on Twitter, "There's nothing we could do now." To me, it looks like it was batted. But even then, so let's say it wasn't batted. Let's say, I don't know, like air was enough to make it wobbly after that he just wafted and it changed its direction. That pass interference call was ticky-tacky at best. I didn't like it. I thought it was another just not very good one. I mean, it was more contact than the first Joe Hayden one, but it was just, I still think that was batted. It's very close. I think it was just barely touched, but you could basically, as soon as he gets his arm next to that ball, it starts wobbling and changing direction. Like, I just wasn't happy with it. But but back to the original pass interference call. What did you think of it when you saw it happen?
Oh, it was just it wasn't good. That's it's really bad. And I actually wanted to talk about another penalty, the illegal contact on the Steelers' final drive with Vance McDonald, I thought that was pass interference, and they called that illegal contact. And of course, Juju fumbles a couple plays later. I think that was pass interference. Do you know the play I'm talking about? Actually, it's the very next play, but
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. And Anzalone was like grabbing onto Vance McDonald. I thought so too, because I texted you immediately. It was like, oh, PI, and then they're like, no, it was illegal contact. But I mean, it is what it is. I mean, there's really nothing.
I think that's a bad call, and that's the thing, because I mean we know the officials have been awful in football for years. The NFL has had terrible officiating, and I for one don't think it's just on the officials. I think the refs don't get a lot of help from the league. I think the league has not done them any favors with an overly complicated rule book, and they haven't hired enough full-time referees, and they just don't care enough to fix anything. I think the NFL in general really needs to start looking at either a way to review like penalties that are being called, or they need to just improve the quality of officiating in general, because right now it's not good enough.
Yeah, do you think adding an extra ref on the field was going to do it, or what do you think? What do you think is the answer here? Is it just being able to review plays? Is it reviewing all plays? Is it reviewing just certain kinds of infractions? Like, what do you think is the answer?
I don't have a specific answer, but one thing I think they should do is add another official that does all replay reviews. Essentially, if there is a penalty that's called, or there's something like something that needs to be booth reviewed, it's not something that New York decides. It's something that, I mean, I don't know. I think there should be someone else right there that if there's something ticky-tacky, he has the authority to stop play right there and say, hold on, we missed something. So, like, if that ball was tipped, he said, hold on, let's stop play. We missed something right here, you know?
Yeah, that would be good to have, like, that one extra guy that makes sure the penalty is all right. Yeah, I can see that working. I just think that for any penalty that would be over 10 yards or more should be reviewable. So, I mean, you don't get to review false starts, which I guess is also still a problem in the NFL. We saw one missed in this game. But it wouldn't be false starts, wouldn't be offsides, wouldn't be neutral zone infractions, but it would be any penalty that's like a big one that's would move the ball a significant amount, like holding, a pass interference call, and all those ones. I think that's where you start, and you kind of go from there, because, I mean, it really just needs to start somewhere, because I'm assuming that they're not going to just immediately start saying, yeah, we're going to review all penalties from now on, because they're also worried that's going to slow down the game a lot more. But I just feel like starting with the bigger plays, the ones that are going to affect even more yardage-wise, I feel like that's what they should start with, and then go from there to figure out how they're not going to slow down the game, and how they're going to be able to work this in.
It's, I don't know. I don't think this is something that gets solved next year, though. I think this is going to take some time.
I agree. I feel like it's going to be at least 2 years. It's going to take something happening in, like, the Super Bowl or the playoffs to actually get them to relook at it. I mean, like, they didn't even look at the catch rule after the Dez Bryant thing. They didn't fix it, because everyone was like, Dez called it, obviously, in that big game, and it started that meme, and they didn't look at that until years later, where it happened with Jesse James, and it had to happen in a very key game for them to say, all right, it's time to look at it. It was after a whole season of catches like that too. So, I mean, it's going to take at least 2 seasons in my mind, 2 or 3.
And I think it's not just that, it's also certain rules like the fumbling out of the end zone thing. It's not going to happen until something huge is impacted in, like, a championship game or something, you know?
Yeah, exactly. It's got to be. That's, you're putting it perfectly. It's just got to be in something that's going to piss a lot more people off.
All right, so we've kind of gotten away from the game, and we've gotten into ref ball a bit. Why don't we talk a little bit about the end of the first half? So there was a sequence there at the end of the first half where The Steelers had moved the ball in the first half, but they hadn't been punching it in. The Saints were up 14-6, and the Steelers had 97 yards to go. They had a 15-play drive. They score a touchdown at the end of the half, and they get the 2-point conversion. Really a masterful drive by Ben Roethlisberger and the offense. They get the job done. They tie the game, and then the defense inexplicably gives up a huge gain to Alvin Kamara, and the Saints pick up 3 points right at the end of the half. And sure enough, those 3 points came back to bite them in a big way. Let's just talk a little bit about that impressive drive that we saw from the Steelers, and it really felt like the game turned, and just how quickly just a handful of plays can really change a game for better or for worse. And in this particular case, the 31-yard pass to Alvin Kamara was just awful. Like, that's just something that can't happen on the defensive end. They were so focused on keeping him in bounds, they let him just tightrope down the sideline. That's, I get it, but it's a cardinal sin.
Yeah, it was terrible. It was right after that great drive, and I mean, we saw a few times the Saints had a lot of breakdowns in the red zone. I mean, we saw it at least 3 times where they broke down, and Jalen Samuels was uncovered, got in with ease. It was good, and then Eli Rogers' next play, open. Great. It was 8 points, and then just 40 seconds left on the clock. At first I felt good because I was like, well, you know what? The Steelers waited till third down to get that. They took about 50 seconds off the clock, so now Drew Brees has less than a minute, so they're likely not even going to be able to drive downfield. And little did silly me, the Steelers just let them have their way. Like, they just got downfield so quickly. In 40 seconds, that's all they had. Let Alvin Kamara get all the way down there. I mean, to me, it looked like he stepped out a little bit earlier, but making it a 48-yard field goal instead of a 43-yard field goal doesn't matter to me in terms of their kicker, because Will Lutz doesn't miss. Will Lutz doesn't have those like misses. So that difference of 6 yards was negligible to me. It's just they shouldn't have let him get that far in 40 seconds with 0 timeouts. That's the thing. They had 0 timeouts. I thought there was no chance, and the Steelers just let them work the sideline and get to where they wanted, and it came back to bite them, like you said.
And that's why I was concerned, because the Saints got the ball to start the second half, and that's where you really see the frustration of how the defense played at the end of the first half, because the Saints go down, they get a touchdown with a nice drive to start the second half, and that really makes the comeback by the Steelers all the more impressive. The 14 unanswered points, the 2 touchdowns to Antonio Brown, and the Steelers are able to come back. I thought when they fell behind by that much, I figured they'd be playing catch-up the whole day. They managed to come back. They get the touchdown on back-to-back drives, and they get a huge 3-and-out. I believe that was when they sacked Drew Brees on 2 out of 3 plays to end that drive in between for the Saints. T.J. Watt, Cam Hayward, Bud Dupree, and who am I forgetting? There was someone. Who? Oh, Stephon Tuitt. Stephon Tuitt, yeah. That's right. So he had a touchdown, a huge defensive 3-and-out, and then another touchdown. And then you get the Saints to go 3-and-out again. And, it's now the fourth quarter. You're driving the ball. You're just past midfield into Saints territory, actually. And there's another sequence where the game really hangs in the balance and momentum changes. Stephen Ridley gets a 3rd and 2 carry. And I'd also like to point out to you, Austin, that Mike Tomlin said in his post-game press conference that he intended to go for it on 4th down from there if they didn't get it on 3rd down. So Ridley gets stuffed, and that's not great, but it is what it is, except he fumbled, and the Saints get the ball at that spot. That's killer, and that's what got Stephen Ridley cut from the New England Patriots years ago, and he's had 2 bad fumbles this season. The one against the Browns was kind of absolved because the Steelers were able to win, but this one really hurt. Killed the offensive momentum.
Yeah, this one was really terrible. It's just Ridley needed to get on it. Like, the ball didn't fall far from him. I don't know how he wasn't able to just fall back on top of it and keep it in the Steelers' possession, but just, it was unfortunate. It really was, and I was really pissed off at that point. It was like the first time all game I'd been actually mad because I came in with low expectations, and then that just happened, and I was starting to have high expectations, and that happened. It was just, I don't understand taking Jalen Samuels out of the game when Jalen Samuels has been the guy. Like, Jalen Samuels was doing great this game. He didn't get many rushes. It wasn't what he was doing when he did get the ball. He was rushing forward, and he was used for most of that drive. He was on that drive. The Steelers were rushing a lot. It was the first time we saw like the rush predominant drive, and they just. I guess they were. I hope they were giving him a break. I hope that's why, because they chose Stephen Ridley because all right, this is the best player for this scenario. That's completely on the coaches, because Jalen Samuels was hot. I just don't understand. Even if he doesn't get it, like you said, they're going for it on fourth down. We have not seen Jalen Samuels fumble yet, and meanwhile, in like within 15 touches, Stephen Ridley's fumbled twice. That might not be exactly correct because I don't really know how many touches Ridley has had since that fumble earlier in the year, but it can't be more than 20. If it's more than 20, where he's gotten the ball 20 times, I don't even think he's gotten the ball 20 times since then. I would be absolutely shocked. But really, it was just mind-boggling to me. I was really not happy with it. I don't like putting Stephen Ridley on there. I would have rather had Ben throw, and I don't know. If with Ridley in there, I mean, I guess everything is great in retrospect, but I wish that was not the play call now. Now I wish it wasn't the play call completely, but what did you think of the fumble?
Well, here's the thing. How many times have you seen Jalen Samuels line up in a formation where Roethlisberger's under center and he gets the football on a running play? How many times have you seen that?
Well,
like maybe once? I don't think I've ever seen that.
Not a lot.
And that's the thing. When we've seen the Steelers under center, Roethlisberger under center, and they're in the tight formation, we've seen Ridley as the running back in that situation. I have a bigger problem with the Steelers. If they're going to go for it on fourth down, why don't they try spreading the ball out and then run out of that formation? The Steelers had success doing that all day long. Excuse me, or not all day long, but considering the strength of this defense being the run defense, I felt like the Steelers were getting a good push up front, and they weren't running all over them, but they were doing enough to at least make them respected. I mean, you think about it at the end of the day, this is what's interesting. The Steelers had 65 yards on 18 carries, and I mean, they were moving the ball, but I feel like that in that situation, you'd rather spread them out. And I'm always in favor of running it on third down if you know you're going to go for it on fourth down. That's the only situation I'd do that. I don't think I would have lined it up tight formation like that, but I don't hate the idea of giving it to him as much. But I mean, hindsight is 2022, so I don't know. It's just you can't fumble. That's inexplicable, and that's just he ultimately got bailed out from the fact that L.J. Fort and T.J. Watt had fantastic special teams plays that led to a blocked field goal, but the Steelers' offense wasn't the same. I mean, they didn't score a touchdown. They didn't score any points after that. So that was really just a crucial moment in the game. And then another one, obviously, has to be the fake punt that was just a yard short by Roosevelt Nix. And I know this is probably results-based bias, but I'm not crazy about it. I don't like it.
Yeah, I'm going to go on the opposite because of how much time is left. I think the clock was 4:05, with 4 minutes and 5 seconds left. Do you remember where they would have been punting from? What exact yard line, per chance?
Let me try to find out for you. They were at their own 42.
Okay, so you're at the 42. So likely if you punt it, let's say Barry does get a solid punt, gets it to, we'll be nice to him. We'll say he gets it to the Saints' 10. which is a little bit much for Barry, but we'll say he does it. With 4 minutes left, you're hoping for Drew Brees to not get downfield and not kill all the time with a touchdown. To me, I thought that you know what, you might as well just try it on the punt, give him a shorter field, and because I think with that amount of time, Drew Brees was going to get there anyway, and you have more time for the offense to try and make it back downfield and get a chance to either tie it up or win the game, and that's exactly how it worked out. The Saints got their touchdown rather quickly, and there was 1:25 left on the clock for the Steelers to be able to drive downfield, and it almost did work out, but obviously the Juju fumble came. So I did, at the end of the day, like the decision to fake punt it, because if you get it, you know what, good. You could continue your drive and might be able to end the game yourself. If you don't, you give Drew Brees a shorter field to work with, and he doesn't kill all the time necessarily, and you might have another chance to make it down there.
Well, here's my counter to that. If you're going to go for it there, why don't you just use your offense that has been torching the Saints defense all day long, and Roethlisberger, as you mentioned, is playing the best game of his season. I want the ball in the hands of my Hall of Fame quarterback and my two, very good wide receivers. I want to make a play that way. I don't want to call a run up the middle with my fullback against one of the best special teams units in all of football, and I think that bared out right there.
Yeah, okay, I could agree to that. Maybe they probably should have just went for it with their offense instead, and bet on that. But yeah, I agree to that. I agree to that the offense should have been out there instead of making it on a special teams unit that has been lackluster at best all year.
Yeah, now, at first, I wanted the Steelers to punt it away and bet on the defense like they did last week because it worked last week, but at the end of the day, I remember the sample size of the Steelers defense has not, ultimately most of this year they have not come through in these situations as we've seen, Austin. I mean, they gave up a late touchdown drives in a ton of games. And even if it wasn't just a touchdown drive, it was a drive to either, score to tie it or to put the game out of reach. I mean, they allowed a late touchdown drive to the Cleveland Browns in that first game. They lost the game against the Chiefs. They gave up multiple late drives against the Buccaneers. The Bengals went down and scored, went down the length of the field and scored on them quickly. The Denver Broncos did. The LA Chargers won the game. The Raiders scored a late touchdown. So at the end of the day, the sample size suggests that the Steelers defense would not have done a great job. They did play, I think, relatively well. And that's the other interesting thing. The Steelers really did play well against the run defense of the Saints, or rush offense of the Saints, and that they only gave up 57 rushing yards. The problem is the Saints also scored 3 touchdowns on the ground, too. I felt like they did a good job not letting them get run all over, though.
Yeah, they only averaged 3 yards a carry altogether, and I mean, granted, one of their rushes was Drew Brees taking a knee to end the game, but at the end of the day, they were averaging about 3.25 yards per carry, maybe 3.2 more like. But I felt like the Steelers were actually doing pretty solid against the rush. I mean, you're put in a tough position when a pass interference call brings you down to the 1 yard line. So it's really hard to stop when you're versing 2 like elite rushers, like maybe not Mark Ingram. I know maybe some people wouldn't consider him elite, but Alvin Kamara definitely. Alvin Kamara is not easy to stop. It's so I mean, take it as you will. They did get those 3 rushing touchdowns, but I feel like at least one of them was like, okay, you could just have it because the rest moved them basically down there, and you give them 3 tries, they're basically going to get it.
And mind you, their longest rush of the day was only 8 yards. So, by the way, I do have the total touches by Ridley, not from today. I guess I'll double-check that right now. So, Ridley had 3 carries. So, his fumble came against the Cleveland Browns. He caught 2 passes. That was his last touch. So, he has not caught a pass since then. Including today's game, he has had 18 touches since his last fumble, and they've all been rushes.
Okay, so I was close to being wrong, but I was not. So it was less than 20. So it's been 18 touches since his last fumble. It's not very good.
And mind you, 8 of those touches came at the end of the Carolina Panthers game when James Conner had been hurt and the game was obviously well in hand already.
It's a shame. It's not what you want out of a veteran player. It's really not.
No, not at all. So now the last thing really is the fumble by Juju Smith-Schuster at the end of the game. I don't want to pile on the kid because he's a great kid, and he's made a ton of fantastic plays for the Steelers over his very short career. But the problem is this is a crucial, critical fumble that at the end of the day, if the Steelers don't make the playoffs, this is going to get remembered similarly to the Fitzgerald-Toussaint fumble against the Broncos back in 2016. This was a bad time for this kind of moment.
Yeah, it's a shame. It's really just unfortunate how he came down. I mean, Sheldon Rankins, now that I think about it, why was Sheldon Rankins even down there? Why was Sheldon Rankins so far back that he could tackle Juju Smith-Schuster?
He was in coverage. He was in coverage.
They made the defensive tackle fall back in coverage. That's something. That's ballsy. But regardless, Sheldon Rankins played it the best he could. He pulled Juju Smith-Schuster down from behind so that he fell on top of him, and while Juju was falling, he punched the ball out. And just unfortunate. I mean, it was a bad fumble to have. I mean, it was a good play by Sheldon. Sheldon Rankins. But you got to hold on to it in that kind of scenario. You got to get down. You got to find a way to get your shin down or something, because it was just unfortunate. There was no one in the area to get it besides him, so it really sucked. It really capitalized on, not capitalized. It really was just like a microcosm into the Steelers' season.
Yeah, and it ultimately was the nail in the coffin, and the Steelers now fall to 8-6-1. They've relinquished lead of the AFC North, and with 1 week to play, there's 2 ways that they get into the playoffs. Neither of them are likely. Let's start with the least likely scenario. The Steelers need to defeat the Bengals, which is a possibility. They should be favored and should have a good chance to beat the Bengals at home next week. Then they would need the Indianapolis Colts and Tennessee Titans to tie. And given that that is essentially that's essentially an elimination game, the winner of that game will get into the playoffs, and the Steelers need them to tie. I find it very unlikely that they're not going to be playing to win, which means someone's going to gamble and someone's going to win, someone's going to lose. I see a tie being incredibly unlikely there.
Yeah, I mean, ties are already pretty unlikely. I mean, what do we have, 2 this year? 1 between the Packers and Vikings, 1 between the Steelers and Browns. Like, that's betting on. I wouldn't put my money on that scenario.
And then, obviously, the easiest way would be for the Steelers to defeat the Bengals, and then for the Baltimore Ravens to lose to the Cleveland Browns in Baltimore, another unlikely scenario. The good news is that the Browns have played very well lately. In fact, they're going for a winning record this year, which is incredible given the fact that they did not win a single game last year. But yet here they are, and they're going to have a chance here to really save the Steelers' season if the Steelers can come up with a win. So I guess at the end of the day, what would you put the percentages on of that happening?
On the tie happening and the Steelers winning, I'm putting that at a 0.01%, if not less. That one, there's like almost no chance of that happening. For the other one, it's looking at least a little bit more likely. I'll put it at 35% because something that I think is going for the Steelers' way is that Lamar Jackson hasn't really versed a tough defense yet. I would say. Some people are going to say the Chargers' defense is good. I do not. I ever since the Steelers game, I've just been a giant Chargers hater. But I feel like the Browns actually have a top 5 defense. It's going to be interesting to see how the Ravens' weird rushing attack is going to work against them, and that might help. Also, I mean, the Browns beat them the first time around. I mean, they're a way different team because Joe Flacco was at the helm and 112-9, but also the Browns are a different team. They were manned by Hugh Jackson. They've come alive the past few weeks, and so there's a little bit of hope in me that would put that one at 35%. That's, of course, if the Steelers don't manage to blow it against the Bengals. So I'll put it at 35% for that one and 0.01 for the other one. What are your percentages?
Well, I'll go with the same with you for the tie, and then as far as the Browns winning, I'll give it like a 25% chance. I think it's going to be very unlikely, but they can do it. The Ravens blew a chance to make the playoffs last year, so it's not impossible to be sure. In other news, I don't know if you've been paying attention to the Monday night game, Austin. I just lost a fantasy football championship.
No, I'm sorry, buddy. I guess rest in pieces. Why did Travis Kelce just get a touchdown?
No, Patrick Mahomes threw a touchdown.
No.
I blame Phillip Rivers for laying an absolute egg. By the way, I guess you kind of mentioned it. I'm really not sold on the Chargers at all. I think they are not that good of a football team.
I haven't been since the Steelers game, since seeing them in the Steelers game, because I remember doing the preview and being like, I don't understand how this defense is doing so well. It really doesn't make sense to me. And it's because they're not. They're getting very lucky. They're getting a lot of help from their offense who's coming back from big deficits. I think that I really don't think that they're a very good team. Right now on the AFC side of things, I'm scared of Baltimore. Out of all the teams, I'm not scared of Houston. I'm not scared of the Patriots. I'm not scared of the Chargers. I'm scared of Kansas City, who is actually not doing so hot right now. I mean, they're doing okay, but they also look vulnerable. But I'm scared of Ravens because they look like they're on fire. And if the Titans make it, the Titans are absolute trash. The Titans just almost lost to the Redskins on Saturday, so I'm not scared of them. The Colts might be a sneaky team, but I'm not even sold on them either. The only team that I'm looking at in the AFC battle right now is Baltimore, because I don't think anyone wants to play them. You saw what they did to Kansas City. They took them to overtime and almost won it. I mean, I think that if they get a second chance, I think that game comes down there. And that's basically it. I think Baltimore might make a run for the Super Bowl at this point.
Why don't we segue into a bit of NFL action then? We can just talk a little bit about some of the big games. Let's talk mostly about the games the Steelers needed to break their way. And obviously on Saturday, you already mentioned it, the Titans beat the Redskins. The Steelers didn't get any help there. The Chargers, as you mentioned, just absolutely played awful. The Ravens absolutely crushed them. That game should honestly have finished closer to 42-10 than the 22-10 score that it was. The Ravens offense couldn't get out of its own way in the first half. That should have been one of the most lopsided games of the year.
Yeah, I really had no faith in the Chargers going in, and they proved it. I mean, the Ravens only won by 12, but like you said, I remember you texted me, it could have been 28-0 by like the second half. So
I was telling Will that I felt like the Chargers should have thrown a parade for only being. They weren't down 6-0 at the half, but they were going into the half. It was looking like they were going to be down 6-0, and I was like, I feel like they should throw a parade for that because that was bad. But in any case, the Chargers didn't help the Steelers, and neither did the Giants, who, despite holding a lead for most of the day against the Colts, they blew it at the last minute, and the Colts came away with the big win. And as far as the rest of the AFC goes, the Eagles did the Patriots a favor by beating the Texans. The Texans really struggled and are looking very weak too. So just overall, just coupled with the Steelers' loss, this was about as bad of a week as things could have gone for the Steelers.
Yeah, there's really nothing else that could have happened. Like, the Patriots needed help like I needed a hole in my head. It was just absolutely annoying that the Texans couldn't pull out a win against Nick. It's just absolutely terrible. Then the Giants are just incredible. The Giants are something else. I'm pretty sure it was halfway through the third quarter where it was 23-3, and then it went from there. And the Giants never looked. The Colts never looked back. The Colts just decided, touchdown, 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 touchdown. Nyheim Hines, touchdown. Marlon Mack, touchdown. Just so annoying. And then that game really just pissed me off because I had Marlon Mack in fantasy. They just tried to use Nyheim Hines the first goal line stand. They do use Marlon Mack the second time, but to end the game at the 1 yard line, they decided to throw, and they had Marlon Mack back there. I was just super mad about that game. And then Eli Manning just does Eli Manning stuff and throws an interception on and ending any kind of chance for a comeback, and it really screwed us up. I mean, both the Redskins and the Giants had leads for most of their games, and then they just blew it. They blew it for the Steelers fans. It was really a shame.
And as we talked about, the Steelers really at the end of the day have nobody to blame but themselves, though. Assuming the Steelers do not make the playoffs, what are we saying about this team and this season?
Meaningless. Absolutely meaningless season. Waste of talent. And the Steelers don't lack talent at all. The Steelers are a very talented team. Because you can't, to me, you could hardly improve the offensive line. The salary cap, you can't improve it. You can't improve the wide receiver room, really. You can't. You're not going to get a better quarterback than Ben Roethlisberger. There's just the talent is all there. There's no way the Steelers can improve themselves by drafting or free agency on offense. On defense, yeah. On offense, this team should still be an offensive juggernaut. It's a shame that they couldn't put up points in the Chargers game. It's a shame that they couldn't beat the Raiders even without Ben in there. It's a shame that a lot of things. And then the defense needs a lot of help. There's questionable spots all over. Safety needs to be addressed really bad. I mean, Sean Davis had a really good game, but Morgan Burnett is not staying around. At least I hope not. And then so many other spots. Cornerback 3 needs help. Joe Hayden needs a contract, actually. That's something else. So that there might be extra problems. But really, I'm going to look back on this season and just think it's a damn shame. It's a damn shame that the Steelers got in their own way and had to wait for someone else to try and get them in there because they couldn't do it themselves. It's just not a good season.
A cataclysmic failure beyond belief. I said that before this game, and I still hold that to be true regardless if the Steelers don't make the playoffs. I mean, you said it. They're a talented team. I think that they could get minor upgrades at positions like tight end and maybe supporting cast, backup running back or a backup tight end. That's, minor kind of stuff there. We know this is a good offense, a talented offense, and we've seen good things from the defense at times this season, but on the whole, just not a good unit enough. They don't take the ball away enough. The secondary has really, really struggled. This is going to be a big year for Tom Bradley. It's also a big offseason for Keith Butler. I think there's a chance he gets let go if the Steelers don't make the playoffs. Do you think he comes back next year?
I don't think so. I think his time has run its course. I mean, you immediately saw the problem starting the game. You saw Vince Williams on Michael Thomas right in the beginning of the game. He just really, really just loves pushing his limits with putting linebackers on wide receivers and stuff like that. It's just, I think he's going to be gone. I think, though, it's funny, I think there's a chance Mike Tomlin is gone. I hope not on that part, but I feel like he is not on the hot seat, but I feel like they might be considered.
Really?
Yep, I really do. I really genuinely do.
What makes you think that?
Mostly because of the performances against teams that are subpar at best. I really think that they might be over that. That is my. I hope not. I'm just thinking that because of the Steelers' inabilities to beat these bad teams like the Oakland Raiders and stuff. Like, who is that really on? This has been a thing for a while, and I feel like, and it's really only with the Steelers that they lose to so many subpar teams. Just, I feel like that really goes on Mike Tomlin, and they might consider it based on that.
I would be that would be the most shocking football move I think I'd ever see if the Steelers end up doing that. I mean, Bill Cowher once had 3 losing seasons in a 5-year stretch, and Mike Tomlin's never had a losing season. So I would be incredibly shocked if that happened, and I'd really question the motives and knowledge of the front office and Art Rooney if that is what they do. I know he has his problems, but what I think really just needs to be done is I think there needs to be a change with some assistants, and I think that someone needs to be hired to help him handle specific game management things like clock management, when to throw the challenge flag, and certain situational things, because we know that Tomlin is a good coach, but there are certain things that he struggles with, and I think that just adding another assistant would help him. So I think that's where the Steelers need to go. And as far as Keith Butler goes, like you said, I think his time has come and gone. For all the great things he does in scheming up blitzes, I think it's pretty easy to say, especially with the whole Michael Thomas thing, he does not do a good job of scheming coverages most of the time, and he typically does not show a willingness to make adjustments.
Yeah, really, it's stubbornness. The stubbornness is probably going to get him fired because he refuses to change, and he blames it on injuries or whatever. There is really no excuse for it at the end of the day. And
I know you didn't get a chance to see a ton of the game, but early on, the Steelers were blitzing Drew Brees, and I remember, I think we both did. I certainly touched on this. I felt like blitzing Drew Brees, like with more than 4 players, you should only do that very specific times, like very rarely. The Steelers early on kept bringing like nickel blitzes. They kept bringing Mike Hilton. They kept bringing Cam Sutton even a few times. And every time Michael Thomas would be on one-on-one coverage and he'd scorch whoever was on him. Just every time like clockwork. It was just ridiculous. And all I had to do was see it once to say like, look, this is a terrible, terrible idea. You don't rush a quarterback like that and blitz him when he gets the ball out in less than 2.5 seconds every time he drops back. Every time he drops back, it's boom, ball's out. Why waste time sending more guys? If you're going to take a chance, just take a chance with your front 4. Leave more guys back there to cover. I felt like that was mind-boggling.
Yeah, I saw with Morgan Burnett, too. Morgan Burnett was coming in on some blitzes, and it's just not ideal at all. I really don't like the defensive back blitzes, but that, in any case, just...
Yeah, I'm not crazy about them. I don't mind blitzing when it's only, four men blitzing, but I think the Steelers did it a little too much and they brought too many people too often, and as a result they got burned. They did make adjustments, but again, you have to make adjustments a little bit sooner than they did. And the other thing, I praised Keith Butler last week, and he does deserve credit for the game plan he created last week, but Austin, that was also the 5th game Keith Butler has faced against Tom Brady, and albeit a weakened version of the Patriots offense. And it really shouldn't take you 5 times to finally figure out an opponent.
Yeah, it only took 5 times to finally find a way to stop them. But yeah, it's time to move on. Is really the thing.
Yep, and that's really all there is to it. But yeah, no playoffs this year. I think Butler's gone. I think a couple other assistants are gone. Cataclysmic failure. Failure beyond belief. Probably the biggest collapse or worst season result since the Steelers' 2009 season. I don't know if you remember the Steelers coming off their most recent Super Bowl win. Had a Super Bowl hangover where they lost 5 straight, including a Thursday night game at the Browns, 13-6, where Roethlisberger was sacked 8 times. First time Roethlisberger ever lost to the Browns. But I think this would be the most disappointing season since that year.
Yeah, no, I agree. I feel like because this team had so much promise, it's different from the 2013 team that didn't make the playoffs. That team started off and looked like hot garbage, and there wasn't really much to do about it. And that team ended up trending upwards at the end and almost made the playoffs. This team just trended downwards from really trended downwards for the first 2 games, started picking it back up, and then just trended downwards for this end of the season. It's just really, really a shame. That's like the best way I could put it. It's just a shame.
And other disappointing seasons, you mentioned 2013, 2012, the Steelers also finished 8-8. But I think hindsight will bear out and I think you'd agree with me, the Steelers just weren't as good of a team then. Because you remember they ended the 2012 season bad and started 2013 poorly. There was a stretch in the midst of those seasons where the Steelers were 4-11, and they eventually turned it around. But those 2012 and 13 teams were kind of retooling and just simply were not good enough. So I don't, I don't really hold it as though they were disappointing in the sense that they just we expected more out of them. I just didn't think they were as good. Whereas the 09 team came off a Super Bowl. They had a great defense, 2 Super Bowl MVP receivers, a great quarterback. That's a team that should have made the playoffs, and that's kind of closer to how I'm feeling with this one.
Yeah, I could agree to that.
And then besides that, just the 06 season, again, another post-Super Bowl season. But yeah, that's a crushing defeat. And we've said it all podcast. The Steelers played really good football at times, but again, they struggled when it mattered most. They made key mistakes, just like they have all season, and now their season is in doubt. And again, it should never have come down to having to beat the Saints in New Orleans. And it's been a somber episode, but I think it's been good for us to air our grievances and just kind of get it out of the way. And we'll turn our attention to the Cincinnati Bengals, huh?
Yeah, it's time. And the Cleveland Browns, I guess.
Yep. Yes, indeed. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for following us on the Stronger Than Steel podcast today. Have a fantastic night, and obviously a disappointing end to what was a great game. And honestly, that was a great game. I mean, even with the officiating problems, that was a very entertaining game.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. I didn't feel like either team ran away with it. Obviously, the Saints came back. The Steelers came back. Pretty good game. I like games with a lot of score changes.
And just another example of the Steelers being good enough to play against these teams, and if they ever, made it to the Super Bowl, we know that they could play with them. But again, they got to get there first. But in any case, thank you as always for listening to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. Have a great night.
Have a good night.
You have been listening to Stronger Than Steel podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget